and once we can start whenever Jeffrey and Ray and everybody else is ready.
I'm still trying to get permission.
That's okay.
I'm clicking on a lock. I'm using my password. I didn't have to do this previously, but
it reminds me very much of the early days of radio. You know, not that I know that much about it, but I know a little bit, and some of the things. You know.
well, all I'm getting lots of black panels showing me desktop 1, whiteboard, iPhone, iPad, etc., Acrobat Reader, Preview, Finder.
Which program are you using to?
Well, I'm on a MacBook. I'm in Zoom. I was wanting to show things from Preview on a Mac, and
you certainly should be able to share a screen, a preview screen. Okay, just to demonstrate, should be screen sharing now, and that's me sharing a preview screen, and I'm going to stop sharing to give you the chance to share. So I was able to did you see it? Did you see that page for a moment?
Yeah,
it went too quickly, I'm afraid. I was looking at something else.
Okay, well, I flashed up a screen from Preview, so it is possible, and it was spotted flying past by Patsy. Good morning, Harriet. You're muted. You're muted as usual. Are you able to speak today? Okay. Well, if you want to interact, you can always put something in the chat, and if we aren't noticing it, then use reactions button to raise a hand.
Well, I've got various pictures and maps to add to what I'm saying, so it's be extremely unfortunate if I have to do it all just by word of mouth.
Yeah, absolutely. There, you can see me. I've raised a hand there to show you what.
I'm sorry, friends, but I'm feeling quite fragile at the moment. I'm going to have to leave it and go. And
don't you worry, Ray. Don't worry. Thank you very much for. Don't worry.
Take care, Ray.
Ray was in hospital yesterday, and he's come very nobly to open the meetings. Well, when you're ready, Jeffrey, I will ask you to introduce yourself, because Ray had the details of what was to be said at the beginning. So is that okay? I can't see him now.
Oh, okay, well, look, I'll start, and let's hope that somehow I'm allowed to share my screen when I get to it.
Okay, well, just to quickly preface before you start, if there is faffing around required, I can edit out the faffing before I post it, and I've managed to do that before. So if you needn't feel embarrassed or constrained, because it does take a few moments to get sorted out. We can cut that out of the final published video.
Thank you. Thank you, David. That's very reassuring. Water supply, an explosion, and the Lord Chief Justice. Part 1, water supply. In 1970, I took a job as a structural engineer with Binney and Partners at their office on Artillery Row, just off Victoria Street, which joins Westminster to Victoria Railway Station. Binnies were consulting water engineers. That means they found out how to provide water supplies. Then they designed water supply schemes with contractors building the treatment works, tunnels, pipelines, and sometimes dams that Binney instructed. 10 years earlier, Binnies had designed the second largest dam in the world at Mangla in Pakistan, only the Aswan High Dam in Egypt being bigger. The founder, Alexander Binney, in the 19th century, had been in charge of new water supply in India. Just as British engineers designed their railways, Binney analysed rainfall in different parts of the subcontinent, so knew where to build dams, treatment works, pipelines, etc. In 1970, I had just become a chartered civil engineer. This had entailed periods of employment with consulting engineers and periods with civil engineering contractors. I had moved to London from my native Sheffield in 1967. On becoming chartered, I applied for various jobs, but took Binnies because I could walk there from my bedsitter past Lambeth Palace and across Lambeth Bridge. I was a civil and structural engineer, but worked with water engineers, hydrologists and geologists. Binnies were located near Westminster because much of their work in Britain needed an Act of Parliament. Buildings get permission via the local authority planning department, bigger things by an Act of Parliament via parliamentary agents who find an MP willing to sponsor a bill. I was put to work on a scheme called the Three Valleys Water Scheme. This was a scheme for a consortium of water companies in the northern home counties. The scheme abstracted water from the River Thames at Datchet, not far from Windsor. Via a tunnel, it flowed to a treatment works at Ivor in Buckinghamshire. I designed the buildings which enclosed the plant there. When I go to Paddington by train, I get a glimpse of it just east of the M25. Then the water was taken from Ivor by pipeline to an arc of the home counties just north of London, where the three companies distributed it. Now, this is where I'm going to hope again to share. And I'm flummoxed. If I press share, can you tell me if you're getting...
Yeah, you
can you see
share.
those black panels now?
Not yet.
No, not yet.
Almost.
You hit share screen at the bottom, of course. It gives you a chooser. You choose the screen you want to show, and then you click share.
Well, it's sending me to security things.
I can't think why it would be doing that.
No, well, I've gone back out and come back in.
You're able to click share screen and it gives you a choice of windows to share.
Yes,
Okay.
it gives me 9 windows, which have all got an exclamation mark in the middle of a white triangle.
That's not so good. They should
say unknown on it.
Well, they should all preview what's in the what's in those windows.
Possibly it's because I'm on full screen. I'll just try it without that. No, it's still showing. Well, I can tell you what the first 3 things are. They are maps showing the west side of London. So we can get by without those, but it will be more disappointing not to show you beautiful pictures of Lancashire countryside. But I suppose I could continue.
Jeffrey, I wonder, could those pictures be sent to David and for him to show them? Is that too cumbersome?
Well, there's about 10 of them, and it'll take a few minutes. Let me just see if I can do.
Would it be quicker to send the presentation to David and David could pick out the pictures?
It's a collection of pictures that Jeffrey's got open in a program called Preview, which I have a copy of. He could send me the pictures and I could preview them. And I just experimented. I'm not sure why when Jeffrey goes to share screen, why Preview isn't showing up properly for him.
No, it's showing me a mail host, which I don't normally use. It's not showing my Outlook, which is what I normally use. So I can't quickly email. Well, not that way. I'll just try another way of emailing. Okay, David, I just sent you a drawing, black on white.
Okay. Now it has to arrive. And I'm looking, I'm just
I'll send other things.
doing get mail. I have a lot of emails in my inbox, nothing from you yet. I'm sure you have a good email for me. We're running around the houses here, aren't we?
Well, things are, well, everything we're doing, I feel it's a glorious experiment.
Thank
you know, I think it's because I do remember this, how the amount of effort that used to go into tuning the old radio set. It wasn't called a radio, was it? Called a wireless, and how precious and how fragile it was and how careful you had to be. But in the end, it actually did have a jolly good sound once you could locate it.
Scratching the cat's whisker on the crystal. Jeffrey, I haven't got your email yet, so I don't know what to.
I've sent I've sent another email with 3 or 4 pictures.
Okay.
So what I've proposed to do is continue talking and hope they arrive.
Yes.
So what I was just going to show on maps was how the water was taken from the River Thames in West London, near Windsor, was taken up roughly in line with the M25 motorway to the north of London. It's relatively secondary, that. So I'll go on with my continuing part one of my talk. After 2 years, I felt moved to leave engineering and do Quaker or similar community work, so gave in my notice. The personnel department at Binnie's did not want me to leave and tried to persuade me to stay with the firm by offering me a job in their Hong Kong office. But this was the last thing I wanted. After all, I had moved to London because it was music capital of the world. Pierre Boulez was often conductor of the BBC Symphony Orchestra, and after a day at work, I could go and hear his revelatory presentations of Schoenberg, Berg, and Webern, as well as premieres of his own work. And he was systematically going through the Mahler symphonies, many of which were, 50 years after the composer's death, hardly known. I'm just going to make an adjustment on, I've only just got a shot of Patsy now, so I can't see everyone else at all. Oh, I can, I'll continue. And Quaker-wise, I was influenced greatly by, on the one hand, the London School of Nonviolence, run by Satish Kumar, and also by George Lakey on an exchange scheme from Philadelphia yearly meeting. That led me to being in the core group that founded Some Friends Community in Bethnal Green, where I lived for 17 years. I then spent over 2 years running an international work camp, which refurbished a community centre in Bethnal Green. After that, I got a more normal job as a structural engineer with the National Building Agency. And after that, with a well-known structural consultant, before setting up my own practice. So I had little knowledge of Binnie's work in the next decade. Now we can continue to part two. But any chance of, did any photos come?
Jeffrey, the pictures have arrived on my other computer, which is slightly annoying. So I'm going to try and sign into Zoom on my other computer, and the email not working where I wish it would. And I'm trying to program. Where's the Quaker Friday discussion group? Do carry on meanwhile.
Okay, part two, an explosion. I will describe a project by Binnie and Partners, which I knew nothing of until the 1990s. This is in fact a court of appeal description. The case had already been heard in 2 courts at lower level. Between 1972, excuse me, between 1972 and 1979, a link was designed and built between the River Lune and the River Wyre at Abisted. The link was designed by the first defendants, Binnie and Partners, between 1972 and 1975. Constructed by the second defendants, Nuttalls, tunnelling contractors, and after 1979 operated by the third defendants, the North West Water Authority.
Patsy, if you could make me co-host on my other computer.
Just a second. Right, I've clicked on you. Okay, I click on co-host. Okay.
Thank you.
I'll read a little more, and then if David can show us pictures, it'll be wonderful.
Yeah.
So it's still part of the judgment paper by the Court of Appeal. On 23rd of May, 1984, a party of 38 people from the village of St. Michael's on Wyre went on a visit to the pumping works at Abbeystead. While they were at the pumping works, there was an explosion in the valve house. All those in the valve house were injured and 16 died. The cause of the explosion was an accumulation of methane in a void in the tunnel, which was pumped into the wet room of the valve house and probably ignited there by a match or cigarette lighter. The void existed because the washout valve was partly open and there had been no pumping for 16 days in a period of drought. I can hear feedback.
That's me.
I'll read 3 more sentences. As a result, ingress of groundwater through the walls of the tunnel had been less than the total egress through the walls and the washout valve. Methane accumulated in the void, having entered partly as gas and partly in solution in water. When pumping took place, the methane was pumped up through the valve and into the valve house. So starts a report by the Court of Appeal, which went on to put all the blame for the explosion onto Binney and Partners. I'll pause a little and wonder whether David has got to.
I think.
All right.
I think
Right, that's
Ah,
good. Okay, well, can you hear me still? I'll improvise. That's a view in the Forest of Bowland, southeast of Lancaster, looking south, and on the left you'll see parts of a reservoir. Try the next one, David. Scroll it, possibly.
Yeah, I'm. Yeah. It ought to work. It's just
Oh, this is odd. This is
making noises at me, but.
This is odd. You've got.
Oh, I see. I can see.
I think you've got a video or something, which is not what I sent, but I have seen it.
No. Okay. So I'm getting some insight into the problem that you were having. I've got the Photos app open and I'm sharing its screen, but I can't find its screen to let me. Oh, good grief. Sorry. It turns out I was playing the wrong computer. There we go.
Oh, well, okay. That is a dam. I'm not sure whether Binney's built that, but that is a dam on the River Wyre. So we're looking north, east there. You can see it's a rather beautiful curve. Try the next one, David. Now this is the valve house in which the explosion occurred. And you can see it's got a bund around it. That may have been since it was rebuilt and recommissioned, because it has all been recommissioned. And this water scheme, what it does, it takes water from a river with plentiful water, namely the River Lune, and this is abstracted about 6 miles east of Lancaster, and then it goes in a tunnel to the valve house here, and then in those bunches of trees, it spills into the River Wyre, and that goes west and towards into an estuary at Fleetwood. And so this is a public water supply for the people of Fleetwood and Blackpool. So try another picture. I mean, I sent a diagram, and that's I can't see a black and white diagram there, so this is curious.
Okay, so I only got 3 pictures. Did you send a second email? Yes, you did. Pictures 2. Okay.
Yes, that's the one. Yes, can we scroll there?
I'm just.
All right, keep going.
Okay.
Oh yeah, so that is from my email. Thank you. Yes.
Well,
Just show the first email, please. And while you're doing that, I'll send another one.
Okay,
There's a
here's
few more things on it.
my apologies. This is in the email program and not my photos program at all.
Hmm.
Hello,
Hello?
can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. Right. It's just I can see this picture now, but it's very tiny. Okay.
Sorry,
Sorry,
I was muted. I need to be.
I don't know if we can get that any larger, but
It's quite big, the one I've got. It's the printed
okay.
image.
Well, I'll try to describe what you're looking at. In the bottom left corner is the start of Morecambe Bay.
Yeah, yeah.
Then the town of Lancaster is signified just to the right of that. Now it's gone.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the River Loon goes on, and there's a church spire at the top left. And I think that's Kirby Lonsdale.
Right.
And then if we move to the right of that drawing, you'll see a squiggly lot, which is the River Wyre. And if it was large enough, well, you can see a tunnel going across a pair of lines and a black blob, and that is where the outlet, where the valve house is, before the water that has been removed from the River Loon is put into the River Wyre. So that's that. Now I shall just try to send 1 or 2 more pictures via David. If I'm quick enough.
Sorry, this is all a bit gloriously experimental, isn't it?
Quite a bit clearer, isn't it?
I've got 2 computers, one of which is receiving the emails okay, and the other of which is doing my work on Zoom to record it. So this
Oh,
is
God.
going to come across as a strange item in our collection.
Okay, well, I've sent a few more of the key pictures. So
Right.
I'll continue with the talk.
Arrive. Pictures 3. They're downloading now.
All right.
Sorry, they're not quite there yet.
I'll read a little longer, and when you've got them, I'll talk about those. So as I say, May 1984 passed without me hearing of the Abbeystead disaster, as indeed most of the 1990s. In my private life, there were complications and things, and this sort of thing didn't get into newspapers other than the professional ones. And I was just setting up my own company, so I was working long hours on other things. So it was with consternation that I came across a report and read about the Abbeystead disaster. Eventually, I got the papers. Tell me when you're ready, David.
Yes, I've put a picture up, Jeffrey.
All right, well, okay.
And there's
Right, well, I'll talk about, okay, that's the valve house as it is now. And just in the dark shadow to the left is a memorial. If you can find another thing that's a memorial, here we are. I'll read it. This stone is given by His Grace, the Duke of Westminster, in memory of those of the parish of St. Michael on the Wyre and of the Northwest Water Authority who lost their lives tragically in the disaster of 23rd May 1984. And then there's a bit of a psalm. Anybody who's good at theology, we can talk about this later. God will show us the path of life. In his presence is the fullness of joy. I don't quite relate that to the disaster. Is there another picture, David, at all, or is that it now?
That's I think just there.
That's
there's,
it then.
there's
That's
another.
fine. I've
Yeah.
friends have got a taste of the beautiful countryside around there.
Shall I
And,
stop
so I
sharing?
think if we leave your screen share now, I'll keep going. Okay, thank you.
You could turn your picture on.
Is that okay now? Can you see me again? Oh, right. I'm not there, am I?
You're not.
Start video.
There you go.
Okay,
That's it.
I'll do a bit of overlap. So that was the start of a report by the Court of Appeal, which went on to put all the blame for the explosion onto Binney and Partners. Previously, the Queen's Bench had agreed with the County Court that Binney's and Nuttall's, the tunnelling engineer, the tunnel contractor, and the Water Authority shared the blame in some proportion or other. So in due course, I got hold of the final judgment, and I read that it was that Mr. T.C. Hammond, who was a partner at Binney and in whose division I had worked, was thought to have that he should have foreseen a circumstance which led to the explosion. I started to realise its designers were people I had worked with on the Three Valleys scheme, and that indeed I might well have been still been one of them if my new fervour as a Quaker had not taken me on something like a gap year, or in fact a gap 3 years. En route for a holiday in the Lake District in the 2000s decade, I chose a route across northern England, passing Pendle Hill, famous in Quaker history, and across the forest of Bowland, an offshoot of the Pennines with few trees. So I got to Abbeystead and found it to be a hamlet with a few but well-built stone houses. I could see the valley of the Wyre. I saw a memorial plaque to those who had died. That's what I've just shown you. 10 years later, I went again. I asked an older man driving a Land Rover delivering to a school, where was the memorial plaque? He could not tell me. But when I asked if he knew of the disaster, he said, "You bet he did." He remembered a score of ambulances arriving and queuing on the narrow lane. He said the locals thought it would not have happened if Lord Sefton, the landowner, had not objected to a chimney. What he called a chimney. The pandemic meant I could do little, but a year ago, I went back to Abbeystead. I explored a concrete road to the west, which descended to near a reservoir. I asked a man working in a timber yard if he remembered the disaster. He did. He remembered a queue of journalists outside the ordinary telephone box in the area, filing their reports to Fleet Street. In response to my interest, he said the valve house was west of the reservoir. So I went to look and found it. And that picture shows it. And I found the plaque on a rock adjacent to it, the one we just read.
Mm.
The valve house, I think certainly rebuilt, still functions. And I found the associated outfall into the River Wyre south of it and west of the reservoir. Part 3, the Lord Chief Justice. Early this year, I was in touch with the library at the Institution of Civil Engineers on Great George Street near Westminster, and the librarian was surprisingly well informed. She offered to send me information, the main item being the report from the Court of Appeal, and what I have quoted from and shown. This is some 152 pages, so possibly approaching 100,000 words. It starts by reporting the case in the Queen's Bench Division, which seems to have been by way of review and improving on the case held in the County Court at Lancaster. Justice Rose starts poetically. In the heart of the Duchy of Lancaster, between the rivers Lune and Wyre, there is a man-made link, by means of the Loon intake and pumping station, the Quernmore pipeline and the Wyersdale tunnel, water can be drawn from the Loon and taken 12 kilometres southeast to the Wyre at Abbeystead. By the way, Wyre is W-Y-R-E. That's the name of that river. This transfer link was designed between 1972 and 1975 by the first defendants, Binney and Partners, who are consulting engineers of international repute. The tunnel was built between 1976 and 1979 by the second defendants, Nuttall's, who were very well-known tunnelling contractors. Since late 1979, the link has been operated by the third defendants, the North West Water Authority, for whom it was built and of whose undertaking it forms part. A few miles to the southwest in the village of St Michael's on Wyre, concern developed that the link was causing flooding. In consequence, on the 23rd of May 1984, a party of 38 people from that village visited the works to inspect them. They were shown round by several of the third defendant's employees. They all entered the valve house at Abbeystead, most at about 7 o'clock in the evening, and the others shortly afterwards. At about 7:30, there was an appalling explosion. It tore the roof off the valve. It tore the roof from the valve house. Everyone inside was injured. 16 died. In this action, the 31 plaintiffs are representatives of members of the visiting party who were killed or injured. They claim damages for negligence against all three defendants. The cause of the explosion is not in dispute. Methane, which had accumulated in a void in the tunnel, was pumped into the wet room of the valve house and was there ignited, probably by a match or cigarette lighter innocently inflamed by one of the visitors. It is common ground that none of the defendants had foreseen the accumulation in the tunnel of a dangerous quantity of methane. It is common ground that if it had been foreseen, the tunnel and valve house would and should have been designed or built and are operated differently. But much of the 150 pages in Lord Justice Bingham, but much of the 152 pages is Lord Justice Bingham analysing scores of pages of methane data and how it might percolate through thousands of feet of strata. I'll add into my text here. I understand from some of this that about 10 years, around in the 1970s, a paper was produced, I think in North America, showing how methane had percolated up through many thousands of feet of rock from some carboniferous strata or something. And that was the first instance of how it could travel upwards through great thicknesses of the Earth's crust. Anyway, Lord Justice Bingham writes 70 or 80 pages of print, analysing lots of data. He formulates the view that Binnies could not be held to have known this was a risk. He then held they should not be held responsible. The other two Lord Justices did not agree. So my old firm Binnies took the blame. I now know no one who worked at Binnies in those days. My impression is that the decision against them led to this very large consultancy of international repute not getting commissions. Eventually, they merged with an American company, and eventually their name disappeared. I imagine many of the eminent partners were devastated, not least Mr. Hammond, who was made to carry the can. After all, members of the public were killed or hurt. And I remember seeing Mr. Hammond. He'd come into the office in a brown tweed suit and say very useful things. He was probably about 65 at the time. The librarian at the institution tells me that there's a new Binnies in operation now, based in Surrey. Though I was not involved with the Abbeysted scheme, I take heart from the fact that the man who became the most notable Lord Chief Justice of the 20th century, Lord Chief Justice Bingham, did not think Binnis to blame. Whether my colleagues of 50 years ago felt any relief in this way, I do not know.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. I found that very interesting, actually. Oh, can you hear me all right? Is
Yes.
this okay? I don't know. What do we not normally the person who now opens the discussion is not very well. So would anyone like to ask Jeffrey a question about the presentation he's just given?
Yeah. Whoops. I'm going to leave with one computer.
Can't hear you, David. You're mute.
I'm muted, sorry.
Yep.
Jeffrey, I guess I'm wondering how you felt affected by it. You're obviously not involved in the directly in that project, or to what extent do you feel a connection? You're obviously moved by it because you're working with a company that was involved with it. So I'm interested in how it feels to you telling the story. And
yes, well, the official report mentioned, well, so I'll start again. I worked for Binnis for less than 2 years. I was in my 20s. It wasn't unusual for people in their 20s to work for a relatively short time. I wasn't that chummy. I'm slightly reticent. I didn't really get to know them a great deal. Working as an employee engineer, it never quite worked. It was only when I set up my own company in 1984 that I started to feel involved and was sort of offering my engineering experience to people. But I look back and I can remember, I've got quite a good memory. I can remember my boss Martin phoning up the chairman of the Three Valleys Water Company, who was a Sir John somebody, and holding forth in a matey sort of public school kind of voice. That wasn't quite me, but it was quite friendly. I can remember a man starting work there just a few months after I did. That was, I won't mention his name. He wasn't a partner, but his name is the only other name apart from Mr. Hammond from Binnian Partners that seems to appear in the official documents. And well, this was his first name was Patrick. I didn't really get on with Patrick very much. Firstly, on one occasion, he said that civil engineering was changing geography. Now, I didn't really approve of that sort of thought because I didn't think humans should change geography. But on reflection, of course, it's been happening for thousands of years. So in a way, I recognized that Pat was rude. It wasn't an appropriate for him to say that we were changing geography. And if you look at a scheme that takes water from one river 10 miles south to another river, well, that is certainly changing geography. So although I didn't really get on very well with this man, I sort of still remember him. I don't think I remember many of the other people very much at all. On one day, it was announced that there was going to be a coach trip, and we could all, instead of working, go on a coach trip. And we went to see Graffham Water, which is a reservoir near Huntingdon, so the west of Huntingdon. So, and the thought was that people who'd not seen a Binney and Partners water job could go on a day trip, an afternoon trip from London. So we went up the A1, and there was this this very large reservoir with a few yachts on it. It wasn't a weekend. I guess there's more yachts on it at the weekend. And so as well as providing water to people, it provides fun. So to some degree, that's as much as I remember Binney and Partners. Quite often I've passed the Artillery Row and seen the rather ornate entrance to their offices. And but although I've kept in touch with, to some degree, with a lot of earlier colleagues, I never kept in touch with them. My immediate boss was called Martin. He was about 20 years older than me. And by now, therefore, he'd be 98. So, and maybe some people around are inquisitive enough and sensitive enough to try and seek out people and become a detective, but I'm not one of them.
The other thing that comes to my mind is, you know, you're getting methane out of the rock, and of course that's become quite common now with shale gas and so on. But I rather imagine that was an unexplored thing in those times and not understood, and therefore, you know, outside people's perception and hence unexpected. Hence the suggestion, the judgment from the one law lord that Binneys were not responsible, perhaps.
Yes. Well, as I say, it all hinges on a paper produced in a learned journal of findings of about, which I suppose were about 1970 that this was published. And it certainly wasn't in Europe. I think it was in North America somewhere. And of course, the different geologies doesn't necessarily mean it correlates at all. Although on the other hand, in a sense, yes, Mr. Hammond should have been aware of this paper. Well, he wasn't a geologist, and Binneys had a geology department, and a very interesting fellow appeared every fortnight or so in the office to hold forth about geology and listen to what was being suggested. And so I guess I can remember his name, but I won't mention it. So contrary to what I said 5 minutes ago, I do remember other bits of snippets. And in fact, another snippet I remember was a man in the next office. And one evening I was working a bit late doing drawings on a big double elephant drawing board. This was years before computing and computer-aided drawing. And I was whistling to myself loudly a theme from a late Schubert piano sonata. And after a few minutes, the door burst open and this man arrived and said he recognized this music. So I was whistling this exuberant theme from a piano sonata that Schubert wrote in the year he died. This man went off to become very senior at the River Dee Water Authority after that. Graham.
What was done to prevent a repeat of the accident? In other words, prevent methane getting into this valve station?
Well, that's a very good question, and I'm afraid I can't know the answer because by that stage I was no longer a water engineer. By the sound of it, well, they can have meters. They can measure the presence of methane, I think, in a confined space. Apparently, this tunnel was an open jointed tunnel. So as opposed to the London Underground, when you go under the River Thames, you don't want open jointing there. otherwise the River Thames comes in. It doesn't matter when it's a water supply tunnel if water comes and goes from the tunnel. So it's possible that they seal all the joints. That would mean putting it out of action for some months. I don't know the answer to that. I haven't come across a paper. I could research, I suppose, in the institutional library an answer to that. Of course, another thing would be don't have 38 members of the public in a location where an explosion could occur. And I bet they were kicking themselves for that, really. And I suppose that's why initially the Water Authority was one of the defendants. And here again, I'm not awfully impressed by the quality of the Court of Appeal in a sense, because the two other judges, Lord Justice Rose and another one, don't seem to have thought it out as strongly as Lord Bingham. And Lord Bingham, if you look in Wikipedia, he's classed as the best Lord Chief Justice that Britain had in the 20th century, and clearly is able to think from first principles. And he seems to have more or less taught himself the chemistry of methane to be able to write half of the report, which, by the way, I've got a copy of if you want it to be emailed.
I can't see everybody's face, so do people know how to do that clever thing with a hand appearing if they wanted to ask anything? What was it? Which one? Sorry.
Or just shout.
Yeah, just shout. Okay.
I just wanted to say, Jeffrey, I mean, you know, I couldn't follow some of that because I just don't have that kind of brain. But I really appreciate the effort you went to show us the photographs. And I thought that one of the dam was beautiful. And, you know, I was thinking how wonderful and how nice that looks for something that's so essential and functional. And I wondered if when things are being designed, do folk like yourselves have that sort of thing in mind of how to make it blend with the landscape and, you know, not to be an eyesore and stuff like that?
Well, indeed, they do think of what the appearance of a dam will look like. And in Victorian times, dams were built, and they quite often wanted to give them a sort of medieval appearance with castle turrets on them and things. And in North Derbyshire, for example, the Derwent Reservoir has got turrets on it. When you were little, you might have seen a film called The Dam Busters, and they practiced their bouncing bombs on that reservoir. And many public reservoirs, certainly built in the 19th century, would have a sort of ornamental building on them attached in some way, and something that was a bit medieval, which was almost biblical, because it was water supply, and they thought that the supply of water is fairly holy, and therefore let's have architecture to suit. Of course, in modern days, that's done differently, and certainly if I'd been able to show you the maps of West London, you'll see how apparently something called the Queen Mary Reservoir, which is about 2 miles diameter, an irregular blob shape, but about 2 miles diameter. It seems to be on top of the tunnel that we built in 1972, going towards Ivor. So the complexities of infrastructure are vast. And of course, the M25 was built after the tunnel was built. So at some stage, the M25 passes across a tunnel. Well, I imagine the tunnel were segments which are safe from any corrosion in the ground. In the London Underground, they're cast iron and bolted together. That was possibly what these tunnels were. but I can't be sure. I didn't follow the profession of tunneling engineers. I once went for an interview as a job as a tunneling engineer, again with Nuttall's, but I decided to do something different. And I moved back into structural engineering more and specialised in structures to do with housing.
Mm.
I'm looking again, and I still don't get what I expect as an opportunity to share screens. There's lots of things called find unknown and my iPhone. So
Sure.
I'm really disappointed because I would like to have smoothly gone through it.
If you find anything later that you would like, it's quite possible that David could include it. I think when he is that right? That is right, isn't it, David?
It's not so easy to add things to a video. I have to.
Mm.
I've never added pictures into a video. I might be able to do it. I might not.
It's all a learning process.
Yeah, these things.
Yeah, well, as I say, I feel quite disappointed that it can't be an ensemble. I don't know why it didn't work. Reminds me of Zooms on Sunday mornings, about once every 4 times. There's some snag.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I was going to suggest that another time, perhaps, you know, we ought to meet beforehand and try and run it through. But it doesn't follow that it would work, because, as you say, it can work perfectly 3 times out of 4, and then suddenly it doesn't. See.
I'm still getting the pictures downloading to my main computer that I'm using now. I've got some of them, but not all of them. So it's, you know, I apologize for my technology not being good enough backup. We have seen all the pictures, though. They're all in there somewhere. And what I could do, the one thing that I could do, is make a little PDF with all the pictures in it and put a link in that. I'm saying this now so that people who are watching the video, if you look at the comments under the video, then I will commit to putting all these pictures in a PDF document, and you'll be able to click on that link in the comments under the YouTube video and see the pictures.
Oh, I think that'll be great. Thank you.
That's
Yeah.
about as good as it gets. If I try and splice them into the video itself,
Yeah.
it's
You might split
a task. Thank you for your silent comment, Hattie. I'm sure it was encouragement, right?
Any more questions?
Interesting to see, you know, how these, you know, how things can go wrong, and how people, you know, how it's handled by the legal system, to hear that, and the impact it has on people's lives. Do you know what kind of compensation the people who were blown up got, Jeffrey?
Well, as I understand it, there probably had been an inquest a lot earlier, and I'm not sure what the verdicts were. But I think when it goes into the courts, it's really to decide which insurance company makes the payments.
Okay.
So in a sense, it was Binny's indemnity insurance that had to make payments. To what extent these were, I do not know. But in my chat with, I chatted to 2 people at the site in the last few years, and I gather he knew one of these people who was injured but not killed. But some of the injuries were quite horrific. And he described how this concrete roof had been thrown across the valley. So it was a mega-sized explosion.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, we some of us have got to go, unfortunately. I enjoyed that very much, and I felt I learned a good deal. And I'm sorry I couldn't help more with the pictorial glitches, but that you'll have to remember it's a learning process for, well, most of us, I think. Thank you very much indeed, Jeffrey. It was but most enjoyable, interesting, and. Next week, Clive Burton from Bristol Books is going to be talking. The title takes some thought to. It's 20. I think I'm quoting exactly. 20 to train. The life of a tunny. TONNY. I think it may refer to Clive's time in the armed forces, but I'm not quite sure. I could be wrong. Does anybody know what a tunny is? TONNY?
I do.
No.
We're going to find out next week, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So hopefully see you next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Yeah, it's really great.